I'll do that again. We recognize that CVUUS gathers on land seized from the Western Abenaki people by European colonizers. We respect the Abenaki spiritual relationship to the land and waters of the Champlain Valley. We are committed to building a peaceful and more just relationship with them and to promoting knowledge about their history and culture. Good morning. Good morning. I realize it was 70 degrees yesterday and it's 20 below today, but we can be cheerful and warm in here, eh? Welcome to CVUUS, the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. CVUUS is a church that sustains a liberal religious tradition, aspires to be visible and active on behalf of social justice and environmental responsibility, nurtures and empowers us at all ages on our spiritual journeys, and reaches out to be a part of the larger communities of which we are a part. I'm Karl Lindholm, today's worship leader for what has become something of an annual service, a service where we honor our ancestors, the person or people who have made us who we are. I'm not sure whose idea this service is or was. I recall the worship team was trying to come up with a service a couple years ago for an open date around Halloween when the minister was not present, and someone in that group made the connection to All Saints Day, part of Halloween on the 31st of October. All Saints Day commemorates those who have departed. I sometimes drop into that, boss, that departed. We're talking about departed people today. And voila, here we are, this year, year 3. Today, 4 CVUUS members, Louise Caldwell, Ellen Flight, Laura Asurmali, and Ashley Cadwell will honor an ancestor or ancestors of theirs whose legacy is important to their stories. Now today is going to be a little more of an improvisation than most Sunday services are. Poppy's not here. The children are going straight to the Fenn House. Ronnie's not here. Ronnie's designated substitute is ill. So we brought in the varsity, my friend Rick Hawley. Oh, Rick Hawley. Rick is doing the postlude and the prelude and the offertory music. Liam will do the hymns. And we're grateful for their skills, genius, and spontaneity. Also, you'll notice there's a mistake in the order of service, which I'll take responsibility for. I like to put mistakes in the services that I do because it lowers expectations, you know. And people will say, it wasn't that bad. They'll even say, and if we do well, maybe even say, pretty good. The mistake in the order of service. You'll see that we're singing the hymn, as a hymn, the song Breaths. You'll see it's also a reading near the end of the service. We don't think you need to see it twice, the words twice, so we'll skip the reading. I asked Abby read Breaths a few years ago at this service, and it was wonderful. So I said, let's do it again, and Ronnie had the same idea. And so we got both of those elements on the service, but we'll only do one. We'll do the hymn. We're glad you have chosen to be here with us on this chilly morning. Yesterday it was 70, today it's 20 below, and This is the last Sunday of the month, and it's the 5th Sunday of October. On that first Sunday, we cited Thoreau, who wrote that October is the month of painted leaves. He called October the year's sunset sky. And he said November, the later twilight. So I'm going to try to keep that in mind. In my taxonomy of the 12 months in Vermont, September and October rank fairly high. November is dead last. So I'm going to think of it as the year's twilight. And next week, you know, it will be twilight indeed, because this Sunday next week will be the Sunday which at 2 a.m. we set our clocks back. We always have some people arrive just as the service is ending. So now this is a good time to adjust your phone if you haven't already. I never mind being reminded. If you're visiting, do sign the guest book in the foyer so we can send you news of activities and events that enrich our time together. If you have a milestone or passage that you'd like to share, please place that yellow card in the offering basket. And all, do stay after the service for snacks and friendly conversation downstairs in the Ann Ross Fellowship Room. Today is a special day, and Mike Greenwood and Wesley Morgan will talk a little bit about that.
Hi, my name is Wesley, and I want to tell you about why you should participate in the Radical Love Exchange. Last year, my family drew 2 really cool gifts. The first one was a parking spot at Miss Martha's house across the street. This was exactly what my family needed because my mom is always running late. The second one was a baseball outing with Mr. Karl. Mr. Karl treated us to Lake Monsters experience. This included hot dogs, drinks, and interesting facts about the Lake Monsters history and players. This year, my family is offering a hygge evening at our house. Hygge is a Danish word. It means to create a cozy atmosphere. We will have hearty food, a crackling fire, and a warm company. I hope you participate in the Radical Love Exchange this year. Thank you.
So we are live today. So here is a program book. There's more than 75 offerings, and 6 more came in this morning. These are the tickets. So what you need to make sure you do is you pick up your 10 tickets per couple and 10 tickets for any children in your household that they can share. And drop your tickets into the items you would like. Please note there's 3-4 items that are silent auction items, and they all have a minimum bid on them. So we'll see how we do with those. But other than that, they're all containers. Drop your tickets in. So choose well, have fun, and we'll see you at a Rad Love event in 23 and 24.
There are many pathways to connection here at CVUUS, activities and events in addition to Sunday services that bring us together as a community. They're listed in today's order of service, some of them, and amplified always in Wednesday's blast. So do pay attention to the blast you get on Wednesday each week. Our gathering song is Enter, Rejoice, and Come In, which if you have the gray hymnal, it's 361. And Liam will lead us in that.
Enter, rejoice, and come in.
call to worship today is by Kathleen McTeague, a well-known Unitarian Universalist minister. I first heard her speak at the college during one of the Dalai Lama visits, and she's just brilliant and wonderful. And I thought we might do her reading as a responsive reading. And if you have a gray hymnal, it's number 721, and the words will be up on the screen. Thank you, Liam. They are with us still. And you read the italicized parts, okay? I'll read the other. In the struggles we choose for ourselves, in the ways we move forward in our lives and bring our world forward with us, it is right we share a history with those lives. We belong to the same motion. They too were strengthened by what had gone before. They too were drawn on by the vision of what might come to be. Those who lived before us, who struggled for justice and suffered injustice before us, have not melted into the dust, have not disappeared. They are with us still. Their words remind us and call us back to ourselves. Their courage and love evoke our own. We, the living, carry with them with us. We are their voices, their hands, and their hearts. We take them with us, and with them choose a deeper path of living. And in the hymnal it says, let us name those who lend strength in our lives. So if you care to just mention a name or two right at this time, we could improvise that way. I would mention Uncle Peter, who died. Anybody else? You mention somebody? Or think of somebody? Let's do that. Thank you. Chalice lighting, if Ellen will help me light the chalice. On the screen and in your order of service are these words by Albert Schweitzer. Please join me in reciting them. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. For our first hymn, it's Breaths, the Teal Hymnal, 1001. Honey, what's the name of the group? Honey? Right. What's the name of the group? The Teal. A wonderful rendition often by Sea Honey in the Rock. Now is the time in our service for the offering. As you know, each week we share the plate with an entity doing good in the local community or the larger community. This month we have been donating to Acorn, a local food distribution program. On the 5th Sunday of a month when it occurs, our donation committee chooses an organization to which we make a one-time gift. Joanna Colwell will tell us a bit about If Not Now.
I get walk-on music. Good morning, everyone. I'm really grateful to CVUUS for inviting me to tell you a little bit about If Not Now. We are a movement of American Jews who organize our community to demand justice, equality, and a thriving future for all Israelis and Palestinians. We call for an end to Israel's apartheid system of inequality. We call on those in power to oppose any policy that gives one group of people more human rights than another group. And here are a few more of our organizing principles. We organize our people. We can't do this alone. We unite through shared values, and there is nothing less Jewish than to make someone a refugee. We are the Jewish future. We remember our ancestors, Jews from across the world in search of safety from persecution and violence. We remember and witness the ongoing Nakba, and that is an Arabic word that means catastrophe, the catastrophe of Palestinians driven from their homes. We show up for ourselves against anti-Semitism in all forms. We are a nonviolent movement. We take care of ourselves and each other, and we believe that we will win. Thank you.
So stand as you are able, and we will sing To You I Give. You I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live, from milestones and passages today. I have a couple of things I might say at this portion of the service. I myself have received lots of notes in the past week because I identify, I guess, pretty closely with Lewiston, Maine, where I grew up. I have no immediate relatives in Lewiston, but I have friends in Lewiston and Auburn. So they were on my mind. I know those places where they are. You don't find me in Schmenge's bar anymore, or at that time, or when I was growing up. But I feel the heaviness that all of you feel when one of these events, these awful events occur. It happened in a place where I know the setting, but it's no more terrible for me and others than I don't know any of the victims personally. My nephew John lived just a mile or two from the person who perpetrated this awful act. But when we have a moment of silence, perhaps we could keep those folks and all victims of violence in mind.
There's a yellow card from Hannah Sessions. Is this okay?
Oh, please, yes.
Okay. There's a yellow card from Hannah Sessions online thanking people who reached out to them to ask if everybody was safe. And I also meant to write one because my daughter teaches high school in Lewiston, Maine, doesn't know any of the folks that were killed, but you can imagine the flurry of text messages and trying to figure out who was where. There was one 14-year-old, but who was not in her high school class. She works with a Somali community, and I guess they weren't at those locations. But the schools will be closed again on Monday while the teachers process this. And the kids will be back in school on Tuesday, so thinking about them all.
Yes. Hannah Sessions and Greg Bernhardt, both of their children are at Bates College. So the people at Bates I was thinking a lot about too, because it was horrifying for them. They were locked down for 2 days. Some students spent the night in the library and other places, so we'll be thinking of them. My dad used to say about Lewiston, he used to compare Lewiston in New York. And he would say, New York is a good place to visit, but you don't want to live there. He said, Lewiston is a good place to live, but nobody wants to go there. So that's something to be true. I also noticed in the Independent and this week that a longtime member of this congregation and a wonderful man, Rob Alberts, died recently. Bob, his son is Bob Alberts. So we will miss him, and our thoughts and go out to Rob and his siblings, and to Lois, who's still at Eastview there. Okay, so with this in mind, let's take a moment or two of silence. Christina tells us not to call it meditation, but contemplation. I think we can call it prayer too. So, ancestors. That's my slide up there. I had a chance 2 years ago to talk about my Swedish immigrant ancestry, my father's side. My mother's side is very much on my mind, and I'm only going to do a few seconds, I promise. I missed last Sunday's. Most weeks I come to services here. I missed last Sunday because I was in Maine visiting my mother's side, my relatives that live there still, for the memorial service of my Uncle Peter, who's pictured here in the lower, the three kids at the bottom, he's the one on the right. My Uncle Peter, that picture is about from mid-1930s. Peter died at 93. And that's my mom in the middle of the upper part, holding her brother David. My mother was one of 12. They all lived in Maine. And the one who's not in that picture, and the only surviving aunt or uncle I have, is my Aunt Sarah, who, by the way, her 3 kids all went to Bates, and 4 of their kids went to Bates in Lewiston. Bates family. And my mother was going to college at Wheaton College in Massachusetts when her father, the man up on the upper left, lost his businesses in the Depression. So she had to come home and take care of, as you can see, her 7 younger siblings. And that, of course, made her a day student at Bates, where she went to school and met my dad. Here's the result. And my mother she used to like to describe her younger siblings, and she had nicknames for all of them, which I won't tell you at this point. And then she characterized them, and my Uncle John was strange, she said. My Uncle Richard was sneaky. David was spoiled. Ruthie, down there at the bottom, was bossy. But she said, Peter was the nicest. Louise? Thank you.
Good morning. Last spring, Ashley and I visited my hometown of St. Louis, and we went down to the riverfront to visit a park that's dedicated to my grandfather, Luther Ely Smith, that's right, basically, at the foot of where the arch is. And there's a marker there that has been recently reinstalled that you can see in this slide. And the marker reads, "This park commemorates Luther Ely Smith, whose vision, dedication, energy, and love of his city and country brought into being the great arch that symbolizes the nation's expansion west of the Mississippi River." My grandfather was born in 1873 in Illinois, but he grew up mostly on the East Coast, where he moved after his mother died when he was 2. He attended Amherst College, and then he moved to St. Louis and attended Washington University Law School, and he stayed in St. Louis. So how did all this work on the arch come to pass? Well, my grandfather's Amherst College friend, who was then President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge, in the late 1920s, appointed my grandfather to a commission to supervise the design and construction of a monument in Vincennes, Indiana. So on his train trip home, as he crossed the river and he looked at this both federal and state courthouse and then the kind of ragged riverfront in front of it, he envisioned a revitalized riverfront and a monument that would commemorate this place as the gateway to westward expansion and to the journey of Lewis and Clark, which began exactly at this spot in 1804. So he dedicated himself to this vision, and he worked over 30 years with the city of St. Louis and the federal government to realize the dream. And in 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order authorizing the Department of the Interior to acquire and develop the memorial. In 1949, a design was selected for the Gateway Arch by Eero Saarinen, an architect from Finland. And Grandpa wrote this to the contest winner, Eero Saarinen. It was your design, your marvelous conception, your brilliant forecast into the future that has made the realization of the dream possible, a dream that you and the wonderful genius at your command and the able assistance of your associates are going to achieve far beyond the remotest possibility that we had dared to visualize in the beginning. My grandfather died in 1951, and the arch was completed in 1965. So he never saw it, but he knew it would be built. On April 3rd, 1951, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch published an editorial entitled, "What a Life Can Be," about my grandfather. The editorial describes many of the other efforts that he championed, like the Missouri Plan, also known as the Nonpartisan Court Plan, which spread far beyond Missouri and is the foundation for merit-based judicial selection in the U.S. He led the commission for the development of the city's first public playgrounds. And in 1920, one of the most moving things to me is that he represented hundreds of St. Louis citizens who were immigrants when they were about to be deported for unjust reasons. The St. Louis Star-Times wrote, "From every city, hundreds of immigrants were rushed to New York, and shipload after shipload of them were sent back to Europe in the successful coup of the Palmer Red Raids, except that none of them went from St. Louis. We have 1,000 loyal, patriotic citizens, who, but for Luther Ely Smith, would be disseminated throughout Europe." Luther Ely Smith's influence was vast, the finest, most enduring kind, that of character, integrity, and skill in human relations. But most of all, he was known as a person, a great, wise, and gracious person. He leaves a heritage to the entire city of St. Louis. I didn't know my grandfather because he died when I was 2. I do feel his legacy and the example of his life deeply. I'm always curious to learn more about him from my siblings. I'm filled with wonder when I see the arch from any vantage point. It is awe-inspiring in its simplicity, its strength, its openness to the future and possibility. These days, as we have witnessed from the beginning of this service and our moments of meditation and contemplation, when so much in our country and the world is so full of violence and injustice and devastation and suffering and uncertainty, I'm inspired by people like my grandfather who do not lose hope and continue to work for justice and good through many seemingly insurmountable challenges.
Good morning. I am the person who supplied the buttons in honor of my grandmother, and I hope that you got your button. And I think as I tell a little bit of her story, you'll understand why a button might be an appropriate symbol. The Industrious Life of Elizabeth Herdman McGovern, Life in a Mill Town. The life of my grandmother, Elizabeth Herdman McGovern, was one of hard work, community engagement, and commitment to family. Her life was centered in and around Putnam, Connecticut, where she was born in 1910. She lived to be 99 and a half after a fall which broke most of the large bones on the left side of her body. She fell when she got tangled in the cords of the vacuum she was using to clean up a mess of a potted plant that had fallen in her home. Her home was hard-earned, as she and my grandfather waited until they had saved almost 20 years to have a house built, since they didn't really believe in banks or trust banks and therefore mortgages. She was able to live in that house for 60 years. Her first work at age 9 or 10 was in the small store her grandfather ran, where she sold candy to the kids in the neighborhood and then later helped scoop ice cream. She finished her schooling at 16 and by 18 was working in the local mills. Her work started in the weaving mills on the looms, where her quick fingers and small stature were an asset. She threaded the heddles and scooted under to tie off broken threads in the industrial looms. She also made the little tools they used to help thread the heddles using ivory they got from the piano repairman. She worked 55 hours a week on average for $8. When they finished the piecework, which was the actual weaving, she could often earn day wages working on the looms to have them ready for the next contract. There was no such thing as a union or OSHA rules, so without protective gear or understanding of the real dangers, they did things like clean the metal parts of the looms with gasoline with their bare hands, which you can imagine was tough on their skin. And that's to say nothing about the fumes or the flammability of, open gasoline. It is clear from her written accounts of her time working the looms and then later sewing various items in other mills that she was seen as a leader with her peers and the management. Women like her got the responsibility of a forewoman, but not a title or a pay raise. She married at 19, and at 20 she had my mother, who was born in 1930 in the front bedroom of the boarding house where they lived and which my great-grandmother ran. As the Great Depression pressed on and then through the war years, my grandmother continued to work in the mills. They had 2 more children, and she helped her mother with the chores around the boarding house. She took about 4 months off after she gave birth and then went back to the mills. And she was fortunate because she had her mother to do the child care so she could contribute to the household income. In another job, she sewed hems and edges at the Wellington Curtain Mill. When fiberglass fabric was invented, they got the contract to hem the edges. Huge bolts worth of fabric would drape over their shoulders so they could shove the edges through the sewing machines, and the glass and the fiber would first cut their clothing and then their skin. The women made themselves canvas sleeves, which they pinned on their shoulders and had drape over their hands. And little did they know that they were also breathing in the fine glass particles, which remained in their lungs for the rest of their lives, causing her breathing problems from time to time. For more than 20 years, my grandmother worked in the mills in the surrounding area and then at Montgomery Ward's. All the while, she did crafts. She was an amazing knitter and crocheter, and she sewed clothing. She sang in a choir and was in a civic club. She was also an avid reader throughout her life. Into her late 80s and 90s, her neighbor brought her 10 to 12 large print books at a time from the local library. And then in her 80s, she helped in a first grade classroom at the local school for more than 5 years as a foster grandparent. I have great admiration for my hardworking grandmother and believe I inherited some of her leadership skills, her love of crafting, and reading habits from her, and I'm grateful to have had her in my life. The button comes from a tin, an old tin that had a price sticker on it that said $1.49. So who knows what was in it, but maybe a fruitcake, I don't know. And it was just full of buttons that come from her life of sewing, but also from the factories that were in the town where she lived her whole life. And I thought I hope it might provide a reminder to all of us and all of you of the people in our families and around the world who work those kind of jobs for little pay, but can still provide inspiration for us. And I just thought I would show you, my notes come from conversations, but also this she wrote me the story of her work life in these, and then the local historical society featured her in their 1996 calendar. So I think she's a woman that would never imagine that somebody would speak of her like this in a church. And so I honor Grandma McGovern today.
You have short legs. So my daughter Johanna is an All Saints, All Souls baby, and she didn't know her great grandparents, and I didn't either, but I do know a bit of their story. My father's, and there he is, the only boy, hail from Damascus, Syria. He and his parents entered Providence, Rhode Island, we think. Hilda and George Asermely, we know were married in Providence, Rhode Island. So we don't know about Hilda. We think she was, and there she is. She was in Rhode Island. We know that George definitely came from Damascus. We couldn't find his name, Asermely, anywhere in Syria. We looked, and we figured out that actually his name had been changed. So, as many of our names of our parents had been changed. So in Arabic, the K is pronounced silently, and so that got dropped. So Qasermely or Qasermely, Qasermly is what you will find in Syria. And actually, Deb Felbeth, who some of you know, who lives here, tipped me on that, because she wound up buying an apartment in 2004 from an Eva, Kasermily. A relation? Who knows? She says we're all related, which I do believe, we are connected. And anyway, so Hilda and George, we know their names were changed. We know that my father had 5 sisters and was the only boy. We know that they migrated from Rhode Island to North Bergen, New Jersey, in the shadow of New York City's George Washington Bridge to start a deli. And my father would come to work at that deli and own that deli. So a lot of experience in the food industry. My grandparents died before my mother moved us from their North Bergen duplex to the suburbs of Wayne, New Jersey, where I entered first grade, but not before learning how to cook from Hilda and George, who lived upstairs. My mother, Eileen Budin, learned to prepare deli salads for the store and Syrian food for which I will prepare for some of you as a radical love exchange gift again, which some of you participated in last year and may again. Anyway, she learned to make Syrian food and would prepare these for these massive birthday parties that we would have. I am my ancestors' granddaughter, well trained in the culinary arts and in rolling grape leaves, and prepared foods for their restaurant, the Lakeside Inn, which they would come to own on Greenwood Lake, which straddles the New Jersey-New York border when I entered 8th grade. Hilda and George came to accept my feisty mother, though they'd wished their only son would have wed a Syrian and named their firstborn son after George, as was their tradition. They did not. My father and mother were early high school sweethearts, had wed before she turned 21 and finished nursing school. And she'd have 5 children before she turned 30 with me as her firstborn. My father's Syrian sisters had equally large families, including a son named George by one of the sisters in honor of the grandfather. I know less of my mother's ancestors. Her German mother died before she turned 11, and her Czech father and family didn't keep records, and you saw the picture earlier of me being kissed. That was my Czech grandfather. So, you know, the family just didn't keep records. We have very scant history, but we've got these pictures that tell their stories, so we know a bit, and we know names got changed. Probably my Czech grandfather's name as well, you know, because we couldn't find any evidence of Budin in Prague when I visited there a few years ago, and just haven't, it's dead-ended, so we just don't know. But we do know about the Surmally side a little bit, so we do know that there's a connection to Damascus, and we do know what's going on in Syria, you know, and I have not been to Syria, you know, but I definitely feel strongly connected to that part of my heritage. So given that there's been so scant record on both sides of my family and low interest in history in high school myself, it's surprising that I became a social studies teacher and that I am the family historian to the extent that we have history to record. I am my parents' daughter, respecting the value of educators and healers and a spiritual life. Raised and educated in Catholic schools from elementary grades through college, and baptized by a beloved Orthodox Syrian priest who we called Father Bumada Bumada Bum Bum Din. You know, again, you know, like I don't know what his actual name was because we didn't record history, but I remember just having a very strong spiritual life, Christian, and that I have been a seeker, a spiritual seeker, settling in and with the Middlebury Quakers, the Friends meeting, which is where I worship, though I'm with you today. And I thank you for holding me, and I thank the ancestors, my ancestors, your ancestors, for being there when we call on them, you know, to lead us and hold us in these turbulent and rich times, saying yes to life.
I had sorry? No, I don't want to. I had a choice of which side of the family to go on, and I thought my mother's side goes back to John Alden and the Mayflower, and you probably didn't want to hear that whole long story, so I thought I'd give you a shorter story on my father's side. I grew up on a the family farm down in Pittsford, which is 22 miles south. My ancestor, this is my 6 or 7 greats-grandfather, Asher Burdett. He moved to Pittsford in 1815, the year before the summer that wasn't. He settled on a farm in Florence. Precursor to climate change, Mount Tambora erupted in 1815, causing snow and frost in the summer of 1816. Crops failed and people left in droves. Asher stayed. In the 1840s, he ventured across Otter Creek to Pittsford, and leaving the Florence farm to his oldest son, and he established our current farm on Elm Street with his second wife, whose family originally owned the property. It is passed on through 6 generations. The 7th and 8th await to take it on, we hope. My father's mother, Minnie, grew up on this farm with brothers Dan and Harold and sisters Sue, Carrie, and Frances. Minnie, my grandmother, married John Ashley Cadwell, my namesake. When I was a boy, my great-uncle Dan Burdett owned and ran the farm. He was a serious farmer, but he was also a cattle dealer and president of the Rutland Savings Bank, which likely supported his farming habit. Did anybody see the film Farm Boy? It's a film set in the 30s in Vermont. And the farm boy was my dad. Though he lived a quarter mile up the street from the farm, he basically grew up on the farm. He was seriously injured in World War II and came back to the farm after a year and a half of rehabilitation and 2 years at Cornell Agriculture College. In 47, he and my mother moved into the original farmhouse of the farm after it had been vacant for a few years. And I was born in 48. And over the next 12 years, 5 brothers followed. Mom and Dad rented the farmhouse from Uncle Dan, who lived across the barnyard and was still running the farm. When number 6 son was born, apparently Mom and Dad felt they needed a secure roof under their house, over their heads, and they purchased the farmhouse from Uncle Dan. And though we lived on the farm, Dad's war injuries led him to give up farming after less than a year, and he turned to life insurance and then very profitably to pension sales, sending all 6 sons to college. Middlebury, Amherst, Williams, Middlebury, and University of Vermont. Guess which son got a car? In 73, at my great-uncle's death, as planned, Mom and Dad bought the farm from the estate, which added to the substantial endowment that Uncle Dan left to the Pittsford Lothrop School, the elementary school. The principal of that trust is now over $3 million. about 5 years ago, no, I guess it was about 10 years ago, I was at a lacrosse game, and a young guy came up to me and said, your uncle is Uncle Dan, right? And I said, yeah, how do you know? Well, I am now the superintendent of schools for the Otter Valley District, and last night, with great trepidation, I went to the monthly meeting of the school board of Lothrop, trepidatious because the week before the furnace had failed, and I knew we were facing a major capital expense for which we had nothing in the budget. I walk in, the board is just as happy as a clam, everything's going on, and pardon me, but are you aware of the problem we have here? Yes. Aren't you aware of the Burda Trust, which pays for all capital expense? No, I wasn't aware. Anyway, it's part of that heritage of passing things on and down. And Dad in the 90s gave the 6 sons the farm. We now run it as Airbnb. If you need any place for family to gather, highly recommend it. The deeper concern, though, as we face around Vermont, is what to do with these small farms, other than carving them up into housing. And I'm just thrilled to say that my niece has moved into the farmhouse with her fiance, and their major mission is to discover what could happen to that 250 acres, to carry it forward. One last parting shot. Louise talked about the arch. This is the Cadwell Arch.
Thank you so much, Louise, Ellen, Laura, and Ashley. On the order of service, it says we have a final hymn. We don't. For technical reasons, we cannot, and we're not going to sing Spirit of Life either. I thought we would, unless you insist. I promised Abby we'd be finished in an hour, because we haven't been finishing in an hour, and people have been talking about that. So unless you insist on, do you want to sing Spirit of Life quick? All right. All right. It's number 123. Sing fast, okay? And stand if you're able. Train. Absolute perfection, because that's what I want to talk about in the benediction. At 11:05, it's 11:03. I always hope we go over by a little bit so I can hear the train. I can see the train go by, and it's so evocative. You can sit. It's so evocative of growing up at night. I would be lying in bed, and I couldn't hear the train during the day, and the train was about half a mile away, and I would hear the train every night, and I'm reminded of so many memories and experiences, and just so heartwarming. In fact, the benediction I was going to say, to talk about, it says riff on train at 11:05. And I think of all the train images in literature. One of my favorite novels is The Natural by Bernard Malamud, and the protagonist in The Natural, he keeps hearing a train, and clearly it's the train of time. It represents time, time's winged chariot, and sometimes the train represents adventure and travel, you know, the Orient Express. A couple of years ago when we did the canvas, Brett and I, we made train the symbol, and we asked Chris Prickett to make up some new words for Woody Guthrie's Bound for Glory. And we said that CVUUS was bound for joy, and Chris Prickett made up these wonderful lyrics. So I'm so pleased. So thank you so much to our speakers this morning, our people who offered reflection, those who offered reflections. If you want refreshments, they're coming right up. And all of the technical people and the people who helped put this service together, they're listed in your order of service. Thank you so much. Thank you to Rick. He's going to play us out with a postlude in just a few seconds. So I hope that your journey on Time's train this week is bound for joy in some small and satisfying, perhaps even large and life-affirming way. As a congregation, CVUS all is bound for glory. Thanks. Rick.